Listen to this for a moment and consider how it feels to be lost in nature. Whether it's a meadow on an evening in high summer, a woodland in springtime, or a lulling coastal marshland. The sounds of our bustling, buzzing and complex natural world can soothe and bring us back to ourselves. We take so much from our natural world, for our well-being, but also for our sustenance, homes and livelihoods. Nature provides humankind the tools it needs for progress and plenty. But as much as we need nature, nature needs us too. Because the organisms that support all of our lives are straining under the weight of our, often unintentional, actions. And when they're gone forever. We are losing plants and fungi at an alarming rate. I'm Dr. Maya Rose Craig. You might know me as Bird Girl. I have a passion for birding and the environment. I believe that campaigning for the well-being of our natural world is campaigning for the well-being of the people and creatures it supports. When we see a decline in our natural habitats, it's often those who are the most reliant upon it for resources that are at the raw edge of this, whether that's for food, medicine, fuel, or materials. So, it's in all of our interests to make sure we challenge unsustainable exploitation of our environment. Royal Botanic Gardens Kew invited me to present this series as we navigate what our relationship with nature has done to our planet, and how we can work across industry, trade, agriculture, food systems, policies, and grassroots practice to reset the course we're on and ensure there's a genuine future for our planet and people. There is so much to protect, and yet so much that is being lost due to the dual crises of biodiversity loss and climate change.
In the last 4 years, over 18,000 species of plants and fungi have been described as new to science. But many of them, about 2 in 5 plant species, are threatened with extinction. About 3 in 4 undescribed plant species are already threatened with extinction.
So, how can we spend less time responding to these problems and more time tackling their root causes? Causes like poverty and economics, and ultimately the pressures we put on environments.
We are part of nature. We need to learn to coexist with nature, since farms, countrysides to the city. I think it's a key concept and a behavioral and mindset factor that we need to have.
We're learning more and more about these entangled relationships every day. Key to this is the idea of biodiversity, the variety of life on Earth, from the soil beneath our feet to the mightiest and most complex interconnected ecosystems. Across this series, we'll be looking at the scale of biodiversity and the work going on to protect our planet's health and the future of life on Earth. Welcome to Unearthed. Nature Needs Us. Across time, expanding human activity has led to the destruction of habitats, a strain on resources, a rise in disease, climate change, and a loss of biodiversity. There have been 5 mass extinctions in our planet's history. The current extinction rate is about 1,000 times greater than that which the fossil record suggests has been the case for previous mass extinctions. This time, though, the leading causes are down to us and our impact on the environment. Dr. Isabel Laridon is the head of Accelerated Taxonomy at Kew, the bedrock upon which scientists discover, describe, and conserve plant and fungal diversity.
So biodiversity is a measure by which we assess the amount of genetic, species and ecosystem diversity around the world. It represents the plants, the animals and fungi that surround us and that are kind of constantly working together to maintain balance and life on Earth. Biodiversity loss is what happens when plants, animals and fungi disappear completely from the planet. So in other words, when they go extinct, or when they decrease or disappear locally, we call that local extinction. Biological diversity is something that we first started to read about 100 years ago. And the term biodiversity itself was coined in 1985, about 40 years ago. And soon after that, the United Nations Environment Programme started to focus on what biodiversity means for us as humans, and that ultimately resulted in the Convention on Biological Diversity in 1992. And since then, many scientists around the world are working to study plant, fungal, and animal diversity and to provide the information that is needed for policymakers, for conservationists to protect them. Many scientists believe that the main reason for biodiversity loss is the growing human population. Climate change is another way in which humankind is threatening biodiversity, as is deforestation or habitat destruction in a more general sense, and that is often due to the expansion of agriculture.
But there is plenty we can do to relieve some of these pressures on environments, to help give plants and fungi a chance to fight back.
We can advocate for nature with our family, with politicians all around the world. We can try to reduce our carbon footprint ourselves. We can change our diet, reduce the amount of meat and dairy products we consume, help to reduce food waste, which is another important thing. Or you can check what you can do to help in terms of restoring our ecosystems. There's a drive for reforestation, but we do have to make sure that we plant the right trees in the right place.
Landslides, coastal erosion, wildfires, and natural disaster can all be a result of environments pushed to the limit by climate change. And we can see the impact on human lives most keenly through these events, often in towns and cities. But there are other, less headline-grabbing signs of the strain too. Billions of people rely upon the natural environment for foods and medicines, and coupled with famine, disease, and resource scarcity, an unsustainable exploitation of the planet connects these struggles. So what is to be done? Protecting the existing biodiversity of natural environment is one big pillar for addressing these challenges. But it needs to be partnered with long-term and sustainable regeneration too.
Actually, we're living a dual crisis, a climate crisis and a biodiversity crisis.
Luis Baqueiro is a Brazilian biologist and project coordinator at Arariba Botanical Garden.
We don't want people to survive from restoration or from nature. We want them to live, so they have the opportunities and to have a proper life and feel respected and part of our society, So I think it's a key factor that we have in our botanical garden.
Luis is also working on the Global Biodiversity Standard, the world's first international certification recognizing and promoting the protection, restoration and enhancement of biodiversity.
Countries that started are the hotspots of biodiversity. So we started with Peru, Brazil, Africa. In Africa we have Uganda and Kenya, and also Madagascar. Now we are in 9 countries, alongside with Indonesia, Hong Kong and Malaysia. And we are a group of local experts that helps to support the certification process, involving local knowledge also. So when we see species in rapid decline, it usually indicates a bigger problem. So highlighting 3 key factors is habitat loss and fragmentation, indicators of ecological problems, and chain extinction. When a habitat is fragmented or destroyed, the species populations decline. So that can occur due to urbanization, deforestation, intensive agriculture, and other human activities. The species may be linked to other species in a complex web of interactions. And if it disappears, it could break and could affect the species that depend on it for food, pollination, and other functions. Could talk also about ecosystem health. So the decline of this species can reflect on negative changes on the environment. So this can include pollution, climate change, the introduction of invasive species, and natural or unnatural disturbances as well. And also talking about the ecosystem services, the services that nature provides us, such as purifying water and air, pollinating crops, and regulating the climate. So if a species disappear, the services can also be affected, and all of those can lead to chain extinctions. Other species that depends on this can also be affected and generating a major and generalized loss in biodiversity. So in short, I think this, when we notice that, are early signs for warning for a broader environmental issue.
Teresia Mungai is a botanist and ecologist based in the Centre for Ecosystem Restoration, Kenya. Their work stretches across 3 restoration hubs in highland, savanna, and coastal ecosystems.
Ecosystems are very complex networks of interconnected species where each organism in that ecosystem usually has a part to play, and this is what we usually call a niche. This is the position that is occupied by each and every organism that occurs in that ecosystem. So when these organisms are here, they play a key role in maintaining the balance and the functioning of this ecosystem. So the decline of one species can have cascading effects on others, which usually is it disrupts the ecological processes such as pollination, nutrient cycling, predator-prey relationships. All of them are going to be affected by just a decline in a species in an ecosystem. So when you bring diversity, what diversity does in an ecosystem is that diversity usually increases resilience of an ecosystem. So the more biodiverse, the more resilient that ecosystem is going to be. And how does this work? There's something we call functional redundancy. So what this does is that if one species is lost in an ecosystem, it is compensated by another species because there is variety. Usually, if one species is lost because of diversity, another species comes in and they can fulfill similar roles and maintain the ecosystem functioning.
Protecting biodiversity ultimately means protecting all living aspects of an ecosystem. But it's clear this cannot be done with science and words alone. As Luis says, this isn't a story of people versus nature, but one about people as stewards of nature. One that plays out in the way local communities are able to access and use natural resources. Kew has identified 32 biodiversity dark spots in the latest State of the World's Plants and Fungi report, a collaboration between 200 scientists from across 30 countries. Understanding what we don't yet know is as crucial to the science as what we do know. Stephen Bachman is a research leader in conservation assessment and analysis at Kew. One of the activities his team works on is assessment and research around the IUCN Red List of Species.
It's species that are in some kind of danger, essentially. And there are 3 of these threatened categories that have these thresholds: critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable, getting in decreasing levels of extinction risk. For the ones that don't have immediate risk of extinction, we have 2 categories. One is called near threatened. It's on the edge of qualifying for a category, but not quite. And the other one is called least concern, which are species that are in no immediate risk of extinction. They're widespread, they're common, and it's useful that we report the extinction risk of those so that people understand that these ones are not in immediate danger, but they could be in the future if threats change. The final category is data deficient, and this is the one where we don't have enough information to determine whether the species is likely to be at risk of extinction or not. We have gaps in knowledge for groups like plants and fungi because we're dealing with a huge challenge here. For plants, we're looking at 350,000 species. With fungi, we're looking at 200,000 that we know about, millions that we don't know about. We're talking about entire kingdoms here compared to what we usually see on the red list, the birds, the mammals. They're dealing with much smaller numbers of species. So what we've tried to do is break down that challenge into different ways. So we've targeted species that we already think might be threatened.
There are also a host of tools now in the hands of researchers and scientists, including genomics and machine learning. AI has helped speed up the pace at which plant and fungal diversity classification can happen, which means that there's a better chance of understanding species and their threats before they're lost.
The process we undertake for the assessments is a sort of marriage of historical data plus the new technology. So in the building where we are now, the herbarium, we are surrounded by dried plant specimens, somewhere in the region of 8 million of them. They've been collected over the past several hundred years. We call them vouchers. They basically vouch for the fact that at a particular place, at a particular time, a particular species was collected. So that's a reference point. And when we gather all of those specimens for a particular species, we start to get a sense of where that species occurs. These individual specimens become dots on a map when we integrate those into something called a geographic information system, a mapping system. And that allows us to plot those species, and once we've got that spatial context, we can calculate things like the size of the range, which is obviously helpful for calculating extinction risk. So if we can see that there's been human activity in an area where a specimen was found, maybe a long time ago, we might suggest that that species no longer occurs there. Things like Google Earth have been extremely useful because we can see not only contemporary images of the planet, but we can scroll back to historical maps. So we can quickly see when our specimen was collected in 1970 in very pristine humid forest, and then we look at the map now and we can see that that's now cultivated, or it's become part of an urban area, or swallowed up by a dam with a huge reservoir. So this allows us to work out that the species range might be declining or contracting. Unfortunately, we have a huge gap in knowledge with plant extinction risk because there are so many species still yet to be assessed. On the red list at the moment, we're looking at about 18% of plants that have actually been assessed. So there's a huge amount of species which are essentially invisible from a lot of global conservation activity because they're not appearing on the red list. And not being on that list means you can become a little bit invisible, unfortunately. One of the things that we can do is use the machine learning to predict extinction risk.
Machine learning maps, informed by existing data, show where species could potentially be, which helps researchers prioritise their collection efforts.
So the World Checklist of Vascular Plants is, for the first time, a list of all the species of vascular plants. And one of the interesting things, they included supplementary data like what kind of plant was it. So for the first time we had these pieces of information for all of the plants available to us. So that allowed us to model extinction risk. And we can say, look, we think these ones are likely to be threatened. You should prioritise those for your red listing activities. Then they'll get on the red list. Then the conservation action starts to happen.
Alex Antonelli is Director of Science at Kew, but his passion for plants and fungal life goes all the way back to his childhood forays into Brazil's natural world. Some years later, he and his wife Anna pooled their resources to buy a 120-hectare patch of land in Brazil's Atlantic forest, north of Rio de Janeiro. For millions of years, this incredible trove of biodiversity once stretched the eastern coast of Brazil. In fact, this is still one of the world's most biodiverse regions, but only 8 to 12% of the original forest remains on account of urban expansion, agriculture, and tree felling in the last 500 years. Water from this forest supports 60% of Brazil's population, as well as medicine and food. The ecoregion is home to around 150 million people. So, what would happen if it were to disappear? The Araca project seeks to understand more about Brazil's Atlantic forest through research and conservation into this particular patch, and what it has revealed so far is astounding.
We are in the Atlantic forest of eastern Brazil. It's a global biodiversity hotspot. It's a fantastically beautiful landscape with mountains covered in rainforest. I grew up in southeastern Brazil near the Atlantic forest where we are now, and I was absolutely fascinated by this fantastic diversity of life forms all around me. But today there are less than 8% left of this forest, and therefore we are here to understand what's left, what's gone, and try to protect what's left and restore what's gone. So we're here with colleagues from Q and other organizations in Brazil and overseas to explore a bit more of the diversity in these amazing forests.
The research team created a pop-up lab in the forest where they were able to analyse the genetic information of species found in the bioblitz, a short, concentrated biodiversity survey within a designated area, during which scientists try to record as many species as possible in a given time. Sort of like a scavenger hunt, but with science.
You can listen that some frogs are singing. So there are some frogs around this river here, and they are singing, and I am trying to find them, but they are quite shy, so...
Just at the base, there's a small, tiny orchid growing.
Look at that bromeliad there. Oh no, Jesus. That's way cooler. Okay. The cricket. Oh wow. It could be a new species then. More likely. Look at the legs.
Yeah. Over time, I become increasingly aware of the rapid pace with which the nature I've grown to love so much is disappearing before my eyes. However, through the insights I've gained in my research, I know that there is still time to fix things. As long as there are natural habitats and species left, there is hope. The future of our planet depends on all of us working together.
An extensive analysis of the use of more than 35,000 species of plants and fungi has been mapped from 11 million records collated by botanists around the world. Species logged by a GPS database include the giant baobab, East Himalayan yew, and relatives of the wild potato. This is the first global map of diversity and rarity of plant species with documented uses by people. It shows that places where plants are used by people also tend to be areas of high plant diversity, suggesting that these could be hotspots for biodiversity conservation action. But just because a species is used doesn't mean it's being overexploited. And understanding this is crucial to making conservation fair. Sonia Dhanda works in the science policy team at Q. She specialises in wildlife trade policy and works on the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. You might have heard of this. It's often referred to as CITES.
Overexploitation of species is a threat to biodiversity loss, and trade is one of those drivers as well. Not all trade is negative, but in terms of international trade can put on additional pressures to wild populations, and therefore we need to take extra measures to ensure that they will be sustainable and they will be there for generations to last. Essentially, we're all users of wild plants and fungi. They're found in our everyday products, in our home, our food, and our everyday lives. We also use, of course, a lot of domesticated crops as well, and ornamental plants that are in trade. A lot of our trade does come from wild source botanicals as well. And in a report that was from Traffic, they found that 60 to 90% of the medicinal and aromatic plants that we are using are sourced from the wild. And those are harvested from local communities and users who do rely on that as a source of income. I think it's really important to understand the cultural reasons that plants are in trade and also how that may vary across different regions and countries as well. So, for example, just looking at the family of orchids and the family also of cactus as well, cacti, they are in trade for multiple reasons. So they both are used as food items, they're used as medicine, and they're also used in cosmetic products, and they also have large ornamental trade as well. So I think it's really important to understand who are the users, where is the trade, who are the importers and exporters, and where should we be concentrating our conservation efforts. They're, not threatening wild populations, but looking more at the either medicinal plants or food plants, or plants that may be used in products. Those can also be sourced sustainably, but if they're not kind of monitored, and if there's not this kind of scientific research, they could be at threat if they're being overharvested. Nature and people are so interconnected that it's really important to look at the social implications of trade, and whether that's because people are dependent on these natural resources as part of their livelihood, or whether it's more on a bigger scale, an economic reason for like a national economy. Trade can be legal and illegal, so again, we don't always have all of the figures which make us understand like the harvesting pressures on the plant.
Across this episode, we've started to understand how plants and fungi are crucial to the biodiversity and health of environments and all species therein, as well as what it means to protect habitats and use them sustainably and fairly. If you're like me, your passion to protect and regenerate our natural world will be strong. But where is the path to positive change? When we talk about taking action, how much is down to us as individuals? And how much is the job of policymakers, NGOs, scientists and communities? Dominique Palmer and her guests chewed this over.
My name is Dominique Palmer. I am a climate justice activist, and I'm joined by biologist Camilla Duarte Hitter and science communicator and author Sophie Pavel to discuss what it means to act now. So Camilla, you are in Brazil at the moment. Can you tell me how your work there gives you a unique insight into the impact of biodiversity loss upon people and nature?
Hi. So yes, I can tell. I'm working at the Amazon. It's a very special place to talk about biodiversity. It's have the biggest tropical forest of the world. And currently I work at an NGO that is focused on basic community conservation. So it is a way that is very intrinsically connected, the protection of the lifestyle of people that are living on the forest and biodiversity conservation, because one is dependent of the other. So here you can see that people that live in the forest, they want to protect them, and they have very little support of the government, and most of the time are invisible, and they do the wonderful and most effective work to protect the environment. So the biodiversity and the social equality, it's fundamental for you can continue living in this world.
That was great. Thank you, Camilla. And Sophie, your book, Forget Me Not, tells the story of your hunt for 10 of Britain's most endangered species. What inspired you to write this book?
I wanted to write a book that reintroduced us not only to species that we may have never even heard of or let alone knew existed in the British Isles, but also to landscapes and ecosystems and habitat that we love, that we don't know about, that have meant something to us in the past or might mean something to us again in the future. And it was just trying to unpick the nuance behind the phenomenon that is climate change and what that means for 10 of these species that are so important to our ecosystems in their own particular ways.
The aspect of connecting to nature is definitely something that I resonate with. For me, I first got involved in climate activism when I learned about how the community I was living in at the time in South London was being disproportionately impacted by air pollution, and how it was the same for communities of colour across the UK and globally. When it comes to this climate and biodiversity crisis, it's so crucial that people and planet are being addressed hand in hand, and making sure that it is equitable and it is just, as exploitation and extraction of our natural resources and people are so interlinked. Protecting the health of communities and our planet and our ecosystems, and also the incredible power there is from communities on the front lines and marginalised communities and Indigenous communities who are protecting biodiversity where they are, and how we can continue to empower those and put those people in decision-making spaces.
I think we need to almost go right back to the basics and say, well, what is biodiversity loss? Biodiversity loss is a fundamental loss of species in an ecosystem, both on a local, regional, national and global scale. So when you have biodiversity loss, you start to lose resilience in an ecosystem. And when you don't have resilience in an ecosystem, that reduces its chance to be able to adapt to change, whether that's climatic change, whether that's a change in human movements, whether that's a change in land space available, whatever it is, it's more fragile if it's got biodiversity loss. So I work for a conservation charity called Beaver Trust, and our work is to restore beavers to rivers and basically return this ecosystem engineer, this keystone species, back to the rivers where they once were 400 years ago. But then it's also about supporting those human communities, and beavers are a good example of this, because beavers as engineers make themselves known very quickly in an environment. They can cause localised flooding, they can fell trees. They are a big change for us to try and deal with in our landscapes here in the British Isles. So we need to ready ourselves for a more dynamic, messier environment that is functioning, resilient, thriving with life from plants right up to predators. And with that, you need financial support, and you need centrally funded, robust schemes to help support farmers, landowners and communities to deal with this change. And as part of that, you need scientific research, which needs more funding.
Can you go a bit deeper into why prevention is better than cure when it comes to the biodiversity crisis?
Yes, sure. I think the simplest answer is because it's more cost effective, in all the ways. And also because it's possible. When you lose a species, you cannot just create the species again. And also, when you think about ecosystem, some loss of services could not be restored, at least not in our time life when you think. Amazon is classic.
But can you also tell us a bit more about what are the economic and social factors that we need to address at the root of biodiversity loss?
Like in Brazil, you have these rich people that have big areas for plantation of soy or creation of cows that get a lot of governmental subsidies. And in opposite way, the people that conserve the forest, that I do in life, in their activities have very low benefits of the government. So it is of course problematic. It is a choice, the government choice for the destruction. The other countries that buy these products pay for it too. So you need to rethink the economic activities. You need to put our efforts and our money. You need to have the choice to choose where to put our money. I want to preserve more. I want that the activities go for people that are protecting the forest.
I think when we're talking about consulting and including those communities who are going to be affected, it's an absolute foundation step for us to be considering when we are talking about changing a landscape to address biodiversity loss. Obviously, farmers and landowners are massively important to our cultural landscape, particularly again here in the UK, where over 70% of land is set aside for agriculture. We have to include farmers and landowners in these conversations. They are our allies and they know the land better than most of us. And so they're a very important voice to listen to. And part of this community conversation is acknowledging the cultural shift that is required to, as I said earlier, help people get ready for a more dynamic, hopefully much more connected, resilient landscape. And that includes having, again, better education on supply chains.
Lastly, I would love to ask both of you, how can we engage the public with conservation issues through social media and the like, especially in an era where the science and scientists are struggling to be heard and where frontline communities are struggling to be heard?
One of my favourite ways to use social media and to see people using social media is to have fun with it and bring joy and humour and lightheartedness into these very serious conversations, because I think humour especially, and joy in many ways, is a very unexpected emotion to pair up with conversations about the future, about climate crisis, about inequality, about social justice, all these very existential, vital conversations. It's very disarming to have those two things going on. And so when we're asking people to basically be custodians and ambassadors and spokespeople for nature, wouldn't it be better if they're actually able to recall these things, if they're able to remember, if they're able to translate them for people who might have confusion or difficulty in understanding, so that we can start this amazing ripple effect that isn't about inducing panic or fear or doom, all of which are valid, very natural feelings, but they have to be short-lived. And yet hope, joy, positivity, I personally find, is a much more sustainable way of tackling these difficult things.
That definitely makes sense. Every single person has the power to influence someone, and that's such a powerful thing to realise and to remember. And Camilla, did you also want to touch on this and how we can engage the public with conservation issues?
First, the big challenge of education, and also, I think, give a voice for the people that live in the areas. Hear the people talking about how is the life and how impact is it. The last year we have the biggest drought of Amazonia. It's like something that I never imagined, see in my life, that the Amazon River go dry. And it's affecting local people in a very bad way. And when you listen, these people talk about it. So how it was before, how they feel these changes, it's very insightful. So I think give the voice for people that are directly in the environment. It's important.
There's so many ways we can educate people. And like you said, having those who, with the lived experience, have their platform and have their voices heard is so vital to that public education. Thank you.
Whilst it's down to governments to make good on their commitments with regard to greenhouse gas emissions, trade and exploitation of resources, it's the science and research collaborations taking place around the world that are informing the decision-making and education initiatives. As individuals, we're not disconnected from nature, but can all share in the conversation in everyday ways. From reading and sharing ideas to supporting positive action on our personal platforms. Nature belongs to all of us and needs all of us, and you don't need to be a scientist to play your part in supporting biodiversity. Next time on Unearthed, Nature Needs Us, we start to look at how plant and fungal knowledge can help us to tackle the planet's challenges through practice, as we explore the wondrous and often overlooked realm of soil and meet with farmers and scientists. I'll be back in a fortnight. You can find out more about Kew and support their vital scientific and educational work at kew.org. And don't forget, you can catch up on earlier series of the podcast on this feed too. Don't forget to follow and subscribe.